Very good. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Very good. So as I was saying, we have covered a lot, guys. There are topics which you, if you go to an interview, you must make sure you mention those topics. Remember, you're there to sell yourself. That's the idea. So don't go back and carry all this knowledge about sudo that you know, about setting up passwordless user that you know, and without you voicing out. You must look for a way and bring out those skills. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Another point is you must be the most talkative in that conversation. Means let them leave with the impression that, wow, this candidate spoke for more than this candidate. We keep hearing her voice or his voice throughout just because you're the one doing the talking. You want to live with that impression. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That's why for every question they ask you, we always say, introduce yourself. For example, thank you for giving me this opportunity, or thank you for asking me this question. Those are additional sentences you are making. Don't just go for a yes or no answer or responses. No, make sentences. That way, the impression they're leaving is like, we have listened to this candidate since we started this interview. That's a very positive response. Okay?
Okay.
So two important things we have covered was tell us about yourself. That's usually the icebreaker. You're in an interview, they always want you to introduce, after they must have introduced themselves, the positions, what's this project all about. They'll say, oh, Mr. Frederick, now please tell us something about yourself. That's the opening page. And the stronger you come out, the better, which means following our strategy, we say mention as many topics as possible. If you can remember the commands, good. If you cannot, that's fine, because you are giving a broader picture. And from those topics that you mentioned, when you're done, that's when they'll come and say, hey, during your introduction, I heard you mention something like bootstrapping. Can you tell us a little bit? When that question comes up now, that's when you can dive into more details. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, I'm not saying introducing yourself more details is wrong, but I'm just giving you a setup such that if you cannot remember more details, okay, go ahead with the broader picture. But if you think you're comfortable giving the details in an introduction, go ahead. That way, the intro should be more than 3 minutes. Don't go and speak in 1 minute and you're done. So you must make sure that we have covered, installation and configuration from, setting up static IP. Don't just build, vanilla servers. Build servers that partition, the standard partitioning, so as to be able to improve the security of the server. Setting users, password, permissions, crunch up, tarbos, troubleshooting processes, disk space issue. What else have we covered? Bootstrapping. So mentioning those things are very important. Any question up to this point? Any concern?
Yeah.
All right. So please feel free to, ask questions. For those of you who have ever been to any interview, please share your idea. That way, you can ask a question and it opens up a whole chapter of conversation that will help. So don't feel free to ask any question that comes to your mind. And so this is usually the case when your resume is up online and recruiter starts calling you. You must be professional at all times, which means when you pick up that phone call, they say, good evening, ma'am. We found your resume online and we have a position for you. As soon as you get the idea that it is an IT, it's call related to your resume. If you're in a noisy background, you have to ask for excuse for you to move away from noise. If you're at home cooking, you have to turn off the gas, turn off everything, and move into a quiet environment. If the kids are at home, you have to say, hold on, let me move to a quiet environment, and so you serve you at all points you are professional. Does that make sense? So don't pick up a call and say until this is just the recruiter, it's not an interview yet, and you're driving, you're talking, some of you are cooking stew, you're talking on the phone. No, you must be professional at all time. So if the call comes in and you are in an environment where it's noisy or you're driving, tell them to call you back in 10 minutes. I'll be packed or normal be driving. That way you can talk freely. Is that clear? Now with your resume, it's not a one size fit all. You're gonna be editing your resume to suit every job you're applying for. So the resume you have is your master resume. If a job comes in and they're in the job description, they're saying they are looking for certain things. Now, you're not gonna be 100% comfortable with everything mentioned in the job description. If we say if you are 60, 65, 70% comfortable, you apply for that job, which means there are some things you do not know about. But 60% of the things are things that you have read on that job description and you think you can perform those tasks, apply for that job. Those things that are there that you do not recognize, those are the few things that you research about them. You Google, you go to YouTube, and so that way, if they come up in the interview, you can at least have a conversation about them, because most of the times there are tools that you know how they function, but they are calling it in a different name. For example, we're going to learn how to use the monitoring tool called Nagios. You may see a job description and they say the monitoring tool that they are using is Dynamo. Now, you'll see the word, we are looking for someone who is very good with using Dynamo, but you don't know what is Dynamo. So when you Google it and you see that, oh, Dynamo is a tool that is used for monitoring, you now can relate that, oh, it means this work exactly like Nagios, which is something we have done. Does that make sense? So that way you can explain the functionality of Nagios tied to Dynamo, which is the tool, because every environment is different. There are thousands of tools there. These Indian guys, they just build anything, anytime. I'm sure when they just wake up, they just make something modern. So so it's a continuous learning process for new tools that are coming. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Very good. So so now your resume is a continuous improving document, because in that scenario, if I'm going to apply for a job and they say they're looking for somebody who is very good with disk space, troubleshooting disk space, network, standard partitioning, and in my resume, I do not have those things listed. I have to edit my resume and add those things there, because those are the key things they're looking for in that job description, and it is not written in my resume. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So you have to edit your resume, add those key things, and even add them at the top front, because they have 50 resumes in front of them. There are 50 candidates. They're not going to waste time reading all your 4-page resume. That's why we have key points of skills that you are proficient with at the top of your resume. So you have to move those things that they are looking for at the first 2 paragraphs of your resume, especially with the current job that you're working on, which for all of you should be Dynamic Tech. That way, within the first page of your resume, they have seen half of the things they are looking for in their job description. That's what pulled their interest to you. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Any question up to this point? So one important question I wanted us to address tonight, because is what projects are you most proud of? So we're gonna be doing 2 questions, just like we have already handled. Tell us about yourself and describing your environment. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So when it comes to projects, the formula we're going to establish is the fact that they can't just ask you, please tell us about a project you're proud of, and you dive into, let's say, pseudo. You have to create a scenario, build a scene. For example, you have to create a problem, suggest a solution, and then provide steps to implement that solution. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So let me share my whiteboard, and And then we write down some topics and discuss on that. And feel free to always interrupt and ask a question. Very important. So let's look through key topics we have covered that can be used for projects. Sudo is very important. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Password plus user, and then standard partitioning. And once again, cron jobs. I don't want to do cron jobs. And let me see. Recovery root password.
Okay.
So there are more other things which we're going to do. When we do them, we're going to add them into this list. For now, for example, we will do Nagios for monitoring. When we do NFS, we'll do LVM, logical volumes. So these are the 4 key things which, if a question regards to a project comes up, as for now, these are the topics we're going to bring up. Now, if we say we are using a formula that states that you should be able to mention a problem. So let's go back there. We say you should be able to bring out an existing problem. And then let's start this one so that we can make it different. Then we'll say solution. And then steps to implement the solution you stated above.
Okay.
Good. So this is how you present the project. So if you're asked this question, please, can you tell us about the project you are very proud of? And out of these 4 topics, you say you want to use sudo. So what is the problem? How am I going to begin this conversation? What problem should I set up when it comes to sudo? So what do we use sudo for? Let's start from there. Who can tell us? What is sudo anyway?
Super privilege to give super user privilege to regular users.
To give super user privilege. Remember, super user means you are giving them root password, but that's not what we are doing. You're correct. That's like, 3/5. I need somebody to take it up to 4/5.
A pseudo user is a user who has been given access to high-level files, but not access to the entire system. Why say high-level files? High-level access, as in
Yeah, high-level access.
yeah.
Yes. So they can also say elevated privilege. So some you can go to some environments and instead of say sudo, they can say, Ms. Yvonne, can you give him elevated privilege? Elevated. It means it has been raised up. Come on, correct?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Elevated power, something of that sort. So, so a sudo simply means giving a regular user greater access or improved access, or just like we said, a limited privilege. Does everybody agree with that?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So most at times, as we said, this scenario never happens to the root user. So it means, no, that was passwordless user, correct? So most of the times, as we said, this usually happens for regular users that maybe they want to run some commands or some installations, especially developers, and they are getting access denied, or you do not have the privilege. Has anybody seen those errors?
Yes.
Yes.
So what usually happen is that these are regular users. Developers will always want to do something, and they will ask, please, can you perform this task for us because we don't have super user privilege? And so we'll always perform those tasks from them, especially when it comes to deployment. Who remembers when we talk about environment? Any scenario that has to deal with, a situation whereby someone will send a request and say, can you move us far? Anybody remembers that scenario?
I don't think I understand your question.
Yeah, when we discussed about environment, we said developers have access in the dev environment. Most of the times when they're done with their code, they'll always put a request and ask us to move it to test so that they can check it. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's because they do not have the privilege to move from one server to another because they are not super users. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Sir.
So most regular users have this limitation that they cannot fully navigate the system. They cannot make some installations. So most of the times they will usually place this request to us system admins to make those, carry out those installations or move or deployment for them. So does that sound like a hindrance, a problem? It can slow work. Is that true?
True.
Is that correct?
All right.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Janelle, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Good. So the problem we are creating in this example regards to sudo is the fact that we had a scenario. So this is the problem proper. We had a scenario whereby regular users, especially developers, could not move some files, and they keep going back and forth for us to provide them with this assistance. And there was need for me to give them a sudo privilege. And this cannot just be provided by, I cannot just make that decision as a system admin. Upper management needs to be able to approve and say, yes, you can be granted sudo privilege. And then our job is just to implement it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you are asked this question and say, can you tell us about a project that you are very proud of? Yeah, opening, if you say, okay, let me talk to them about sudo, the opening statement should start with this problem. Thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. We had a situation, you are not explaining the sudo, you are explaining the scenario and then bringing the solution and then the steps. So the problem here is we had this scenario at my current job where regular users were having activities which they need to perform, but this was not going through because they didn't have super user privilege. So they keep getting access denied or failure or permission not granted. And so there was need for me to elevate their access level. And so in order for me to do this, I needed to provide them with sudo privilege, which is an elevated access. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Does that problem sound like a problem?
Yes, sir.
So when it comes to project, you must begin by creating a problem first. That will be based on which topic are you choosing for this for. Does that make sense?
Yes.
sir.
So we just created a problem for sudo. Was that understood?
Yes.
Good. Now, after you have created that problem, you move forward and say that the solution that was implemented in this is to give this user a sudo privilege. So the user was authorized, you don't need to go, was granted the access, and my job was to implement. Step 3, which is the solution, you just stated the solution there, which is sudo. Step 3, which is steps to implement sudo. Now you begin by saying, what is the first command? These are the various steps to grant a regular user a sudo privilege. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
All right, good. So let me do a dry run, which means if that question is asked based on all the explanations we have heard, how am I gonna approach that question? Does that make sense?
Yes,
Yes.
Good. So thank you very much for taking this opportunity to take this interview with us. Please, can you tell us about a project you are proud of? Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. In my current job, we had this scenario whereby regular users were trying to run certain commands and they didn't have the privilege, trying to access certain files and they were getting access denied and there was need for them to perform this activity. So I'd advise that they should request for elevated privilege access, which is sudo. That way, if it is granted, we can go ahead and make those implementations for them. That way, they don't have that difficulty of always being denied access because they are only regular users. Now, this solution about providing them with sudo privilege was granted, and I was given the responsibility to create sudo privileges for these users. Now, these are the steps. This is how you create a sudo. The first command to run is the ssh-keygen-trs command. This command is gonna, no, this is for passwordless authentication. So the first thing to do with the sudo privilege is for it to get into etc sysconfig network command or etc ssh_config or sudoers and make changes for this privilege. You can also achieve sudo privilege by via into etc group and add each of these users into the wheel group. With this set in mind, this is what will provide these regular users the ability to be able to run sudo privilege. Now, it is important for me to state here that for you to run any sudo command, you must include the word sudo before any command that you're running. This will give regular users the ability to run commands as though they are a root user. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Now, that is for sudo. If we are going to say, let's run one for passwordless user, you have two biggies. The same formula: create a problem, solution, and steps to implement the solution. So passwordless user, what is the problem? Who can try to create a problem? Based on the fact that we say most of the times passwordless users are used to run maybe cron jobs or move files in scenarios whereby there's no human intervention, maybe late in the night. We have a job that is running, creating a tab or maybe at 12 midnight and or move a file from server 1 to server 2. And we have a cron job that has been set. And remember, if you have to do, you must do SCP with a username. You're not going to wake up midnight just to enter the password when that command is running. So you can create a password user to be able to make that deployment. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Noella, is that understood?
Yes, sir.
Good. All right, so passwordless user, let's create a problem. So as I was saying, when passwordless users are concerned, we do not do passwordless users for any regular user. So there's never a day any regular user amongst your team. When I say your team, who are those I'm referring to?
Admins,
Yes.
system admins,
Developers.
Perfect. Everybody in the IT team, not just system admin. Remember, system admins, they are your colleague. They have the same privilege. They are super users too, like you, correct?
yes.
All right.
So they can take care of themselves. So when I say your team, I'm referring to developers, the project managers, scrum masters, software testers, cybersecurity, the 8 or 14-man team. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
So there's never a scenario where any member of your team should say, I keep forgetting my password. For example, you know how you can get to your laptop and you can't remember the password you're using.
Mm-hmm.
And if that system has been hardened or set for security. If you enter it more than 3 times, it's gonna log you out. Do we know how to do that? Remember, there's a file we saw where you can set limits, right? Grace period.
Yes.
Perfect. So what we are saying here is best practice is none of such members from your team should ever tell you to do that. And you should be knowledgeable to say that for security reasons, we can never make your user passwordless. Does that make sense?
Yes.
For example, Janelle and Ice can be so close friends, they go for lunch every day. The G's, they go for coffee break, Coca-Cola break, all kind of break. And they've become so familiar, and Janelle will just say, Ice, just, change that thing for me to be password. I can't be entering this password all the time. And since they are friends now, Ice can convince and say, okay, let me just set it up. That's breach of confidentiality, and that system is no longer secure. When auditors come in, we all know that there are things we can look at and identify user that does not have password. Is that correct?
Yes.
If they put a system in front of you and say, check if all users do have password, where will you go to?
It's a shadow.
What will you look for?
It's a
The batch, the shell.
password. What's that kind of thing?
You can draw the sign, you cannot call it in, no problem. Good. There's the exclamation sign that tells you that any user that have that exclamation sign means it does not have. So if auditors look and they see Janet M, that tells them that looks like a human name. And if they see those 2 signs, it means this user does not have a password. Does that make sense? And they'll question you about that. And so it is good practice is no regular user should ever be given a passwordless login. So most of the times when we create that, it's for cron jobs to use them. So we can create a user and call it user 01, which means do not name those users that should look like human names. You can call them rivers, you can call them mountains, you can call them user, or you can even call them cron user or user for this purpose. That way, it clearly indicates that it is not a regular user. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So now we have not started discussing the problem when it comes to passwordless user. We are just talking, having a conversation, because sometimes interviews might end up just having a conversation. So you guys need to understand this concept so that you can sustain a professional conversation and speak such that it can make sense. Ice, is that true?
Yes, it's good.
So you can say, we do not create passwordless users for regular users. That's for security reasons. There are systems that use password. These are only users that are being used within the system, maybe by applications or by cron jobs. The applications you will install, and they'll tell you, you must create a user for this application. It is that application that uses that user. It is not any user that is being used by any human intervention. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Good. So with all that said, we are now dealing with passwordless user. What is an issue or what is a problem that we're gonna create in this scenario? So for example, we had this job that runs at midnight. This job was responsible to always move files from one server to another, because these files needed to be viewed by applications on the other server. So it was always a manual process whereby, someone needs to get up at midnight and run this job manually or make this deployment manually. So when I came into this project and I was assigned this task to, get up by midnight and make sure that this job is executed, I suggested to upper management that we can make this job to run automatically without anyone needing to be up at midnight and then run SCP space-p, file name, username, at IP address, hit enter the password, and then that file is moved. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
So in order to, so this was a recurring problem, and I suggested that we can create a passwordless user, set this cron job to run at 12 midnight, and this job should be able to pick up, this cron job should be able to pick up this file, use this passwordless user, and move this file to server 2 effortlessly. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, how many of you did your cron job run successfully? I remember only Yvonne who responded. We had a cron job project. How many of you had it executed?
Oh,
Not
yes,
sure if
mine.
mine did.
I can't hear you.
I said yes.
Oh, okay. Yes, there was a male voice also.
That was
Quick
me.
question.
I said I'm not sure if mine did.
Yes, so it's good to practice that. The only thing that usually fails when it comes to job is whether the cron Z daemon was running. So if you start and stop that, and restart it, that should work. Yes, somebody had a question.
Yes. So I was wondering, what if they follow up and they ask you, oh, what files did you have to move? What would you say?
Good, just like the project we did, you know, they are not in your environment. There's no particular file, you know, that you can say. It's like somebody will ask you, what are the names of users in your environment? It is not conventional. What do I mean by that? It means your environment is unique to you. Not two environments are the same. So the hardly hacks, there's no particular name. If I say I was moving file Johnny, they're not gonna tell me there's no file called Johnny. I can name any file, any name as a system admin. Does that make sense, Janelle?
Yes, it does.
So they will not ask you what kind of file, but they want to understand what idea, what scenario are you talking about? For example, the problem we are building here is there is a file that we need to move. For example, you can say log files. What do log files contain? Log files contain activities on the system. Now, there are different log files that have different content. Did we discuss about that?
No. I
All
believe
right.
so. Yes, yes, yes.
Because if you have to look for where are logs located, who can give us the absolute path? Let's start from there. Please write that on the chat, everybody. Let's drop the absolute path for log files in the chat.
What's the chat? I can't see the chat.
Okay, I'm gonna text there so you can see it. Can
Okay.
you see it now?
No. Oh yeah.
Yes, yes, sir.
I respond. Absolute path where logs are located. That's an interview question. They'll always ask you, where will you find logs? /var log. Okay, that's good. var log. You want voila. That's why I say absolute path, so that you can know that it is more than one.
Oh,
So always use var log. Now, when you get into var log, you're gonna see many log files. You're gonna see secure. The important ones are secure. I'm gonna put them here. Logs all users trying to log in to the server. So if you open this file, when you see it into this location /var logs, and you see secure file, so take note, during your spare time, you can look through those files. You will see all users that were trying to log into that server. Since it's only you, you see mostly the username when you log in as user 01 or when you log in as root, that will be captured. Messages, logs, all activities on the server. So messages is very important. Anything that is you do on that server, it will be recorded under a file called messages. And the other secure tool is the name of a file. Does that make sense, Noel?
yes, sir.
Good. And then you also have boot. Who can suggest what will be recorded on the file called boot?
Bootable files.
Files used during the boot.
Remember when you power on your server, there are some writings that comes up and we say, okay, you always see okay following up those writings. Is that true?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, all those writings are saved on this file called boot.
What are they called?
So all those writings, when you power your server, all those checks that are showing until you get before you get to the blue screen, all of them are saved under this file called boot file.
Okay, so there's no like a word to use to call those things, those words.
Remember when we discussed it in bootstrapping, what did we say?
Isn't the BIOS?
Before the BIOS, come again before.
Post?
What was the first step in bootstrapping?
Post.
Right. Oh,
Post, correct. So
post.
give me the full meaning of the post.
Power on self-test.
Good. Power on self-test means that the system is testing all the peripherals. For example, it's testing it's the FS tab. That's one of the most important files. It's testing your keyboard. It's testing your mouse. It's testing your monitor. So when the system sends a test to any of those gadgets and they respond, that when you see the OK sign on that screen. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's gonna test all your file systems, all those file systems when you run df-h. The system will send a ping to all of them, and when it responds, okay. When the system has sent all those power on self-tests and everybody looks okay, that's when it puts up and you can log in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So those first write-ups that you see when your system is running posts, all of them are being saved under this file called boot.
Are those files? Or just
What? Those write-ups?
yes.
No, they are just outputs, and those outputs are saved under this file called boot.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yes.
And all of these files are in the log files?
Yes, they're under /varlog. So if you see this /varlog, you're gonna see you're gonna see about 12 files. I'm just picking the key files that you should know their content. Make sense?
Yes.
And in these key files, the first one we mentioned is called secure file, correct?
Yes.
And then we mentioned messages. Now we're talking about boot. Are we together?
Yes.
So that was by the side. Let's get back to passwordless user. This session needs to last just 1 hour or so I don't keep you guys waiting here. So we are looking at what problem, if I want to use this topic about passwordless user, how do I create a problem? We had this job that needs to be performed every midnight, and someone will always need to get up and run this cron job or run the SCP command so that we can move this file from server 1 to server 2. You can create a scenario. Let's take, for example, server A or server B. Make the interview a conversation. Don't be stereotyped, don't be tense. Talk to them and feel free. Just be yourself. Okay? And so in this scenario, when I was assigned this role to be able to make this deployment at midnight, I realized it's a burden. We can keep assigning different team members next week, the other week. So I suggested that we can create a passwordless user and make this process run automatically. Do you see how I transition from the problem to the solution?
Yes.
Good. So this was approved and I was given the opportunity to run this project. This is the process of setting up a passwordless user. We said there's an opening statement when you want to discuss passwordless user, which we all must remember to use. You can remember the opening statement. ICE. I remember you had issues with that. Can you remember that opening statement? When we said, yes, it's related to a root user.
It's not RD. It's not RD break. What is it? That's the root password.
I can't hear you for some reason. You're cracking.
No, I was saying I know it's not RD break, but that's for root password resetting. I can't remember.
All right, good. So whenever you're discussing passwordless user, you make sure you mentioned to your panel that the root user should never be used to create a passwordless user, which means never make
Oh.
root passwordless.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
That's their opening statement. And that gives them a big understanding that this candidate knows what he or she is about to say. If you can open up with this statement, it's very important. I've been to an interview, and that's how I open up that statement when it comes to a passwordless user project that they asked me about. And after I responded to the question, the chief interviewer said he almost stopped me when I mentioned the fact that never you create root as he said, because from that moment he knew that I knew very well what I'm about to say. The same thing happened if you're asked about bootstrapping. They're not going to use the word bootstrapping. They're going to ask you, can you explain to us what happens from when you power on the Linux server until when it comes up available for use? You're going to tell them, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. This process is usually referred to as bootstrapping. And then you can kick off from there. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it is very important, as we said, the objectives of interview is you came to sell yourself. You came to show your knowledge. You came to project that knowledge. And so don't go back with anything within you that you have not expressed. So back to our passwordless user. The problem is that it is very aching to wake up every midnight. This week is your week and perform this move, and which will take just 2 minutes, and then you go back to bed. So I suggested that we should create a passwordless user, set a cron job, and this task should be able to run without any human intervention. So this was approved and I was assigned this project. These are the steps. Write a cron job that runs 12 midnight. You don't need to make it so detailed and say the minutes over here. No, you don't need those details. Now create a passwordless user. That's the core. The command to do this is ssh-keygen-trsa. 2 keys are gonna be created. You're gonna have a public key and you're gonna have a private key. We will always share our public key and always keep the private key. So let's say we are moving a file from server 1 to server 2. We're going to share our public key from server 1 to server 2. We do this by running the ID command, which is ssh-copy-id and the name of the user that you're using. It is important to make mention that to generate this key, you must SU to this user that you want to make it passwordless. Does that make sense? Now, when you run this copy ID command, it's going to generate a file called authorize_keys file on server 2. This public key that you're moving will be saved inside this authorize_keys file. Now, with this key successfully moved from server 1 to server 2, if you now attempt to log in from server 1 to server 2, you're not going to be required to use password again, and this user will be passwordless. Now, you can write another cron job that will use this user and move whatever file you have set for this deployment. Does that make sense?
Yes, I have a question. I noticed that I could only do that one time. So if you try to SSH again, you have to put in the password.
No. So far as you move the public key and it's on the server, because this is how it functions. When you SSH, you're telling, if you're leaving server 1 to server 2, you're just like we said, you're knocking at the door and they'll ask you to call a name. Who are you looking for? If you say you're looking for John and there's not John in that house, the door will not be open. So you must call a name of a user. That's why we said the user you're using in server 1 must be existing in server 2. So those 2 users must be on both servers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that worked. That's not
Good.
that's not the
So
problem.
I'm explaining to you the theory behind SSH, how it functions.
Okay.
So when you knock at the door and you call a name John, and they say, yeah, user John, they say, oh, give us the password. You enter the password, successful, then you go in. Now with SSH, you have shared your public key. Now when you SSH, your SSH is coming with that private key. When the private key matches the public key, remember those two keys were created together, right?
Yeah.
So when your private key recognizes the public key that was created together, it does not ask for a password. So the key there is make sure when your private, that public key you're sharing should be that public key that was created the same with that private, because it's like a lock. The key is coming in. If it doesn't recognize that lock, it will be that's a bad key, correct?
All right.
So let's take this to be user one. This is the public key that was created for user one. This is the private. So when this private is coming and recognizes this key, it will go through passwordlessly. If user two comes up, and remember, this public key was for user two, but this private is for user one, and there's not going to be a match, so they will not permit. So the private key, that's why we are keeping it, so that when SSH is going out, it goes with your private, and when it recognizes the public on server two, they'll resemble that they'll go in without any passwordless, without any password. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
And with this knowledge, that will help you to troubleshoot something, because if you're trying to go passwordless and it does not work, you should say, okay, let me check the public key. Does it resemble the public key I have? Because you understand that it is your private that needs to come in and match with the public. Make sense?
Yes.
Now,
I don't know if you understood my question. I was
no,
able to
I
SSH.
understand your question. I'm explaining some theory around your question. That way, you can even troubleshoot it by yourself, which means you can go to authorized key file, and something may have happened, because to be sincere with you guys, some things happen at work we still don't have explanation for them. Imagine after you have run the SSH.copy file and you go to that authorized key file, there's nothing there. It's empty. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So it means you need to run it again so that you make sure that the public key is in that file, because that's the only file that SSH will check. That's the private key who's going to go there to check to make sure that it can see a public key that matches that private key. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So one of the reasons that may be affecting your situation is that maybe the public key that you have in the authorized file may have changed. Maybe you may have VIE into that file and something, even an S or just a full stop. Remember, VI is very delicate. If you delete even a full stop in that file, the whole key has changed. It's not going to recognize your private key when it's coming in. So in that scenario, you may just have to move that same public key again and see if that will work. But nothing should be, when you log in without a password the first time, it should always work.
Okay.
But Yvonne, what do you think? You want to add something to your question? We can take a practical look at it.
That's okay. I mean, I'll just try again. I tried 2 times. I mean, I was able to SSH the first time without a password, without it asking for a password. And then when I tried again, the second time, it won't let me. So I tried again, it won't let me. I was like, okay, maybe it's just one time or one-time thing.
No, it's not. That's the moment, or you left your desk and came back
I
and tried
actually
it.
left my desk, shut
Oh,
everything.
maybe you can be
I was,
using a different user.
I was experimenting. I shut down, I came back as root. I was still as root. And then switched to the user because I was using the same user. But it's fine, I'll check again.
No, try again and then check your authorized underscore key files. Remember, a copy of your public key is still on server one, so you can always compare those two keys.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're not just trying to make you guys cram the process. We're trying to make you understand, because you can get to an interview and after you have explained this, somebody come up with a question and said, what if it does not work? What will you do? Are you gonna say we have not treated that? Are you gonna drop the interview and come and call me?
Because I already
They have asked you now that it did not work. No. So we are making sure that you understand concept. Now, based on what we just said, if they ask you in an interview and say, how come after all this setup, your cron job failed, it did not work. What do you do? Troubleshooting starts, right?
Right.
So based on what I just explained, number one, I want to check, make sure that my public key was actually moved to that server. I'm going to check the authorize underscore key file to make sure that the public key that's in there matches the public key that is on server 1. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now we are dealing with cron job. What else am I going to check?
I want to check that the daemon is active.
Perfect. I want to check to make sure that my daemon is up and running. And even if it is up and running, I can decide to restart, stop, and start again. Just, troubleshooting has no one formula fits all. Express yourself, let it make sense in your ears. There's a lot of learning. There's a lot of room to learn at work. There's a lot of room to grow. They just want to hire somebody that has that from his or her language, they can understand it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So yes, secondly, I'll check cron jobs, make sure daemon is running. Thirdly, I can also look through to make sure that the file, wherever the absolute parts are all stated correctly in the cron job. Because imagine if I see a cron job that is creating a file touch by John, where is that file going to be created? That cron job is bound to fail. Am I correct?
Yeah.
You must include the full absolute part where you want the file should be created. And also, what do you need to include about the command to make sure that command is successful? Who can remember?
The shell, or is it bean bash? Or SBean, the shell basically, and which is either bean or SBean.
Perfect. You have to state that you have to also include the absolute part of the command. Remember, we always run which command, right?
Yes.
To get that pattern. So those are sensible responses that you need to be able to have them as you have this conversation. Because when they listen to you, they'll nod their head and say, this is not from any textbook. This is somebody who has actually run a cron job and it has failed before and they have troubleshoot and resolved it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Just imagine if you're asked in an interview, okay, a user call you and they're saying they're trying to cut a file or veer into a file and they're getting permission denied. How will you resolve this? Who wants to respond to that?
Well, first of all, do you have privilege to that file?
Good question. Now, there's no right or wrong answer. So you just bring out your thoughts. So good. That's how you can start from that angle. Somebody else can start from a different angle. So go ahead, Yvonne.
And if not, you can either grant the person permission to that file or you can give the person sudo privilege.
Good. No, grant permission or sudo privilege. Yes. In that scenario, also mention the fact that you can't just grant them sudo privilege. Do you make that decision?
No.
No.
Yeah, so always mention the fact that you can advise them to go request elevated privilege or sudo privilege, and if that request is approved, and then we can grant them. When you speak, they know that you understand the fact that system admins don't just do whatever they like. There's still some authority above them. Does that make sense?
Right.
Now, that same question, the user is getting access denied. Any other approach? Remember, this is under permission we are dealing with. What comes to your mind? Who can say something else?
Check the permissions on the file.
Perfect. You want to check the permissions. Maybe this file can have read only, and you're trying to VI, and you're not going to have, maybe you don't even belong to any of the group. You're not the owner, any of these things. So why do you expect to have access? So checking the permissions on that file will tell you all of that. Make sense?
Yes.
So after you have checked the permission, you realize that, okay, they do not have any of those access. What else can you do? Somebody else.
You advise for them to get permission from upper management, and if that's granted, we provide them the permission.
All right. So everything, you know, you want to always bring out this idea that you don't just implement things as they come. You understand that there's authority above you. System admins. That's why. Who did you guys should remember? There's this warning after you set sudo that says, with great power comes great responsibility. Did anybody read that?
Yes.
Yes.
What came to your mind when you read that? That's to tell you that they are warning anybody that that sudo has been assigned to them, that now that you have sudo, you can do anything, but know that it is your responsibility. You will be accounted for.
Yeah.
Everything is recorded. If you do not have sudo and you attempt to use sudo, the message that pops up is that this
You'll be reported.
activity is going to be reported. Has anybody read that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. This is just to tell you that everything is recorded on the system. And also, as a seasoned system admin, remember, your resume is projecting 7 years. Am I correct?
Yes.
Bridget, you're laughing. So they want to hear 7 years experience from your conversation. And these are all simple things. As Chanel rightly said, I'm going to check permissions. So the permissions will help me know whether he or she should have access. He's not even the owner of the file. It does not belong to the group. Just mentioning those things tells your interviewers that she's knowledgeable a lot about permissions. You know, now we have had the solution, which is grant permission or set up sudo. You know, I want somebody to talk about changing permissions to give them their capability, you know, or using ACL. Now, remember we said ACL is very important. You must be able to sell yourself with ACL. In fact, we should be able to create a project with ACL. Yes, ACL is very important. We can't leave ACL out. What does ACL stand for?
Access control level.
Yeah, I can take level. Some books will call it level. Some books will call it lists. So are we clear with passwordless user?
Yeah.
Standard partitioning. This is very important. In fact, the last two, I wish I would have brought them first. So we have a few more minutes to go. So standard partitioning. If I have to use that for a project, what is the problem? Now, remember, the advantage of standard partition is that it now gives you more space, gives you the ability to add a disk and partition it. Regular servers that don't have standard partition, they face the risk of cyber attack and disks full up anytime /root can hit 100%, which is not good. So creating a problem is very simple. We had most of our servers that were poorly built, which means they had just /root partition. They were not standard partition. And so I suggested that, or we also had most of these servers that could not go through successful audits, you know, and so my suggestion to upper management was we can add more disks to the system and convert them to standard partition so that we can create other man points like /var audit log /var10/10. That way, these servers can have enough disk space and can pass a successful audit. Does that sound like a problem, Reverend Frederick?
Yes.
Now, what is the solution? This was granted, and I was given the role to reconfigure these servers such that they can have extra partition or go through successful audit. How was this performed? These are the steps. When you insert a hard disk, you should be able to view these disks on the system. You run the fdisk command against the device name and following all those steps. Can we remember our steps for standard partition?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
When we do revision, correct?
Yes.
You guys respond. Okay, good. So standard partition is, in fact, if you ask me to prioritize these topics, I would say number 1 should be standard partition. 2, 3, 4 ACL, and then 5 recovery root password. So whenever if you have to use standard partition, talk about disk space, talk about security. Make sense? These servers were poorly built, and so I suggested, and they were all failing audits and always running short of disk space. I suggested we can add disks and reconfigure them. Perfect. We did that standard. We're gonna let LVM, and this topic is gonna standard partition is gonna go out, and LVM will replace it, just like we did. Static IP has disappeared. I mean, automatic IP has disappeared. We're always dealing with static. Make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
So LVM is one step higher than standard partition. So maybe next week or 2 weeks time, do LVM. So when we do that, standard partitioning will disappear, and everything we're going to be building will be LVM. Does that make sense, Jana?
Yes, it does.
Perfect, good. So are we good with project when it comes to standard partition?
Yes.
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 Okay, recovery root password, very important. This is one of the first assignment that has been given to system admins when you get to work. They'll say, you know, remember, you guys have 250 servers. No system admin will have time to create users for you. It means login 250 times. So they'll definitely tell you, this is the root password, you know, log into the servers and create users for yourself. Because although we are super users, we also have users, regular user account against our names. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So system admins, although we have the password for root, user root, we also need to have password for user Janelle, user Yvonne, user Nelson. Make sense? So we have two access. Only system admins, because root is already there. We said that user is always created when a server is built from fresh, correct?
Yes.
So when we say you create a user for yourself, it's not more root, it's your personal user with your own name. So recovery password, root password, if you have to use this as a project, what usually happens is there are, like me, when I left one of my jobs in DC, I took vacation and never went back. They almost killed me in that job. We're 3 system admins. They retrenched 2, and I was the only one left. I was a junior, and so I'm sure they were cutting down of costs. So they said, let's move these very expensive admins and leave this small one here. And so the headache was too much. I took a 2 weeks vacation and looked for another job. I just sent them an email. So these scenarios usually happen in, now they have no root password account. It was not documented anywhere. Not in my case, so I'll give an example. So most of the times, there are situations whereby, and we blame companies for that. Why should you have a single system admin? You should have 2 or 3. What about if that only single admin is involved in, God forbid, in an accident? Are you gonna be waking up a patient in the hospital? We need root password. So companies they think only about their gains, their profits. They don't mind about the risk. So situations like that usually happen. A single user, a single system admin travel to India, and he cannot be accessed by network. You can't get him on phone. You can, and there's issues in office, and they need help. So a good problem in this scenario is, in one of my last projects that I was hired, or one of our clients that we support with Dynamic Tech, the previous system admin, left, disgruntled, maybe for some reason which I do not know. However, when I was hired, there was no documentation of any access. So these servers were there. They were looking at everybody, and nobody could log in. because documentations were not found. Nobody could locate, root password, and we had to recover this root password for all the systems. Does that sound like a problem?
Yes.
And these are the steps to recover root password. For Red Hat 6, for Red Hat 7, you must make sure you make those distinctions. However, you must not explain both. You can do Red Hat 7, which is what we have studied. Make sense?
Yes,
How many of you have recovered root password?
I have.
I have.
Good. So you can use that as a project. So we have like 3 more topics that are super good for projects. When we treat that, we're gonna, still mention the kind of problems you're gonna create. Now, this is just pre-interview so that you guys can start putting into perspective these topics and how I can put them in a project scenario. And we still have interview preps at the end of the course where we're gonna go through this again and discuss other questions like your day-to-day activity, describe your day-to-day activity. We also talk about the environment. We have discussed that. Question about disaster recovery. We will also discuss, what they'll always ask you, the interviewers will always ask you, do you have a question for us? That's the end of the interview. Now, what question do you pose to them? You're still gonna stay professional. Don't go and ask them, when are you gonna start, or how much are they gonna pay you? Reverend, we have seen all kind of things in this career. So
Not bad question.
we must make sure we guide you guys before you go make an error, and then we all will carry our hands on our heads. So yes, those are things we'll still discuss. But I need to start getting you guys ready with projects like for each of these topics which we have covered. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Now, this same question in regards to project can be asked about a challenge. Remember, what we have tackled today is, tell us a project you are proud of. Now, they can still bring this question and say, tell us a challenge you have ever faced in this your 7 years career as a system admin. What have you had a bad day? Have you had a difficult day? This is the same approach you're gonna use. You're gonna create a problem, you're gonna create a solution, and then steps to implement the solution. So if they ask you about a problem and you want to use any of these topics, the same thing, sudo. What was the problem you face? We had this difficulty of regular users always trying to, run commands as root user, and they're having access denied or privilege or permission denied, and there was a need that we provide them with sudo or elevated access. They were advised to seek grant permission, and if that is granted, then we can be able to set that up for them. These are the steps involved. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And then we're gonna also look into problems, and as we always say in every batch, the same problem you face when you're doing your projects. It's simple for you to be able to bring those same problems in this scenario. For example, Yvonne just told us about a problem. She set up a passwordless user. He ran successfully the first time, and the second time, it was not. How did you fix that? So problem is this problem. You can recall any of the difficulties you have faced during any of those your projects. The issue is follow the format, create the problem, solution, and steps. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
ACL, very important, as I was saying, we are running up in less than 5 minutes. Who can remember the power of ACL? When do we use ACL? Or yes, what does ACL give us the capability? What capability does ACL give us?
It gives the user the ability to have access to a particular file.
Well, that sounds to me like Shimode. But Shimode can give users access to a particular file, right? So this is something unique about ACL. Remember, we said we did permissions, and then we said we're going to take permission one step further. That's when we studied ACL. And there was something, when can we use ACL? Or when we did ACL, what was it that stand out?
So the user will not be able to have access to any other file except
You-
that particular
You just reverse it. If you turn it back around, you get the right thing.
one. Okay.
Okay.
Coming, you're getting
permission
close.
it gives access to a user while preventing others from getting
Perfect.
access.
Perfect. So ACL makes sure that only you, remember, you are not the owner of that file. You do not even belong to the group, but you can access that file. You can via, you can write, you can do anything. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So that's ACL, very powerful. In fact, one of our students implemented ACL, and his boss was like, if you can know this, it means you have been in this field for a long time. Who is that? Is that Clement or Bruno? One of these guys in Atlanta. So it gives a particular, so the reason is because, remember, we have looked at permissions. If this file user 01, file 01, if it has permissions, owner, group, and others, if we go to the group and we say write, remember, everybody that belongs to that group will be able to write to that file. Does that make sense?
Mm.
And that's a reach right there. Imagine we're trying to give Chanel access to file 01, and we add Chanel to the group. And this group has other files in production or in that same server. Chanel will be able to access all those other files. She's already in the group, correct?
Yes.
But that's not our intention. Our intention is to make sure Janelle can access only file 01, which she's asking access to. So in that scenario, ACL can come in. Make sense?
Yes.
That way we run our set ACL, we say user, we put only the username for Chanel, and we say write or read, whatever she wants to do, and we put the file in. Now, what symbol help us to identify that the file is running on ACL?
Plus sign.
Perfect, the plus sign. So based on all what we have discussed, who can create a problem for ACL? Give us a solution and steps. You must not need to discuss the steps, just have a conversation. That way, I know that you guys understand the concept of responding to creating a problem, providing a solution, and then the steps. So let's take this example, just like what we have said. We had a scenario whereby a user was asking access to a particular file. However, as we all know, most access are granted using permissions for using Shimode. And if we add that user to a group, probability is that he or she will have access to many other files that belongs to that group. Does that make sense? And so to prevent that, we had to use ACL, access control list, to make sure that that user has access to only that single file which is asking for. Very simple. These are the steps involved. There are two commands when ACL is concerned, the set FACL and the get FACL. Set FACL will set the permissions, restrictions for a file. Get LLCL will show you which permissions have been assigned. So it is just have a conversation so that you make sense to the ears of your listeners. They will not really care about steps. We all use Google at work. We all research commands to use, but let the conversation flow that they can understand that yes, what you're saying makes sense. So it is okay in any part of your interview for you to say, I know how to find my way around. I can always Google and I can always research and get response. It's very okay. All right. It's just that some interviewers who want to make life difficult, especially Indians, we want to ask you, what is that particular command? In that scenario, you have no choice. You just have to crack your brain and bring out that command, okay?
Okay.
Yes.
It's okay for you to navigate and, talk about your ability to research, find your way around. And they may say, how about if there's no internet?
Mm.
Mhm.
Now they're trying to find
So
out, are
call
you
a friend.
perfect? Are you that sociable, or you're that kind of person that, you're not friendly? It's okay for you to say, I'll ask a colleague. Very okay, very professional. I'll ask a team member. I'll ask someone on my team. So these responses can come in any scenario. You may have a tough question on an interview. And so let me repeat this. There's a no, I don't know. Never make those statements. You can say, I cannot recall for now, but, or you can also say, I'm a very fast learner. If you guys are available to teach, I'm very quick in learning, but they should not ask you about which command do you use to check this space, and you say, I don't remember, or I don't know. You should be able to play around that response and give them something that they can say, they can hold and say, okay, this candidate, she seems to be somebody who can find her way around. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, all this approach is because we are trying to make sure that you don't get tied to a corner based on, something that you have not heard. You should be able to think out of the box. You should be able to think on your toes and think really fast. And so that you can best respond to any question that comes your way. We are rounding up in like 2 minutes. Any question for me?
So we expected to use just one of these as a challenge scenario of something we've done that
Oh,
we're proud
no.
of.
You always use more than one.
Okay.
In any scenario, any topic that it brings up, if you are very comfortable, talk until they ask you to stop talking. Okay?
Okay.
Or you can ask them, can I give you more example? After you have given them one or two. I mean, in your introduction, if you want to go at length, make it broad. Because they'll always tell you this interview is going to be for 30 minutes. This interview is going to be for 20 minutes or 15 minutes. And so if they bring my soft touch or my joker, I'm not going to rush. I'm going to use 10 minutes of that 15-minute interview to sell myself. Yeah, so, and when that way, I know that I have just 5 minutes to go, and the impression I've left is positive. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
So feel free to elaborate, feel free to ask if you can go more, that kind of thing. It's all right.
Okay.
Mr. Nelson, how you doing? I'm not hearing your voice. Is he still here? I don't see Nelson.
I'm okay. Thank you.
Oh, you're Nelson. And then Noella is using which ID?
Prof, I have a
It's
question.
Manuela.
Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Standard partitioning, it's a very elaborate process. One was to choose that during the interview. Is it okay to summarize the various stages, or you have to, break every process down? Because it's going to take quite a while to go through all of the process.
Every topic we deal, you must not go through the details.
Okay.
So let's take standard partitioning. For example, you want to discuss the steps. You run the fdix command against the device name. Now, I'm not saying /dev/sdc. Make sense?
Yes.
I'm using sentences that if a system admin is in that panel, he or she will understand me very well. And of course, they are system admin. They're not going to bring developers to interview me. When I run fdix-a, options will come up. I'm going to choose P for primary. You can go further and explain that the first 4 partitions must be primary. The fit will be extended. I now select all the details and move on to saving my first standard partition. So you must not give all those details. Make it just the command is important. F this. Every other thing is, you can, for example, when we do logical volumes LVM, we're gonna change the ID. You should be able to let them know that for logical volumes, we switch the ID. And I'll show you guys those different. So yes, you don't need all those details because it's gonna be boring. You want your presentation to make sense to your listeners. Make sense?
All right.
If they want details, they'll say, Mr. Frederick, you mentioned about P for primary. Is there any other partition type? They want to hear whether you know about extension. Make sense? So keep it elaborate. If they need any detail, they will ask questions and then you can go into detail. And also you can ask them, do you want me to be more detailed or should I just give a general picture?
Okay.
But don't go ask that question when you don't have the details. So just keep it so that they don't say detail and then you start cracking your head. No. Yeah, so that's a good question. And that should go for every topic. Keep it high level. If high level makes sense, keep it high level. Let them just hear you and hear the sense coming out from your mouth. And that's good. You're good to go. So we have like 3 more topics for Linux, which are good topics for project. And then we should be hitting cloud computing, AWS. Okay?
Okay.
On that note, if there are any other questions, let's call it off for the night. It's not our study day, so you guys can enjoy the rest of your evening. I believe we are going somewhere, and see you guys on Monday. Wish you all the best. God bless you all. Good night.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good
Thank you,
night.
sir, for
See
your
you,
time.
Monday.
Thank you.
Welcome. Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, Wasi.